So during the early days of handheld gaming, we would get a different version of like the console game. So you'd have this really big 3D shooter, and then you would go to like the Game Boy Advance version, and it would be a 2D platformer, right? And that's sort of how it was up until Sony released the PlayStation Portable. That, to me, really marked the turning point for handheld games, trying to be more or less almost exactly like the console version. And now to see how far it's come, I mean, I think it's pretty important to take a look back at the PSP. And today, I actually picked this one up from eBay, and I wanted to go ahead and fix it up because it kind of needs it. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you're subscribed down below. So this is a PSP 2000 model. It's like the all-white edition. It's not the Darth Vader one because it doesn't have like the door with Darth Vader on it. They had so many different variations of the PSP. Personally, I had the original 1000, then I went up to the 2000 that was silver. I never went to the 3000 or the PSP Go or anything like that. That silver 2000 lasted me all the way up until I got the Vita. But I worked on a lot of PSP systems in my time. It was one of the more popular systems that would come in, whether it was from customers or just lots that would be purchased on eBay for the stores. And it makes sense considering there was like, what, 80 million of these things sold. And like I said, there were so many different ones to keep track of when it came to the model number and all of this that it was kind of a headache to figure everything out. But eventually I did it. Looking at the listing for this, they say it was having a hard time reading, and it's pretty obvious that someone's been in here considering the little warranty sticker down here has the screw pretty much pulled through it. It sort of looks like there might be a little bit of, I don't know if that's rust or some residue, may have some liquid damage in here, it's hard to say, but I did try to power it on when I first got it in just with a battery I have here, and it at least turned on and functioned for the most part. It didn't appear to spin up one of these UMDs that I have, so I think what we're gonna do is change out the UMD drive with a new laser and all this, and I got one of these new shells from Amazon. It's been a long time since I've tried one of these. I don't know if they've gotten any better, but I figured we would try to essentially reshell this whole thing, and that should turn it into a like new PSP. For the most part with the PSPs, you just need like a really kind of a sharp Phillips head driver to get around. With the 1000, it was a bit more of a pain to work on. With the 2000, they did a decent job kind of compartmentalizing a lot of the stuff inside the system, which probably made it cheaper for them to produce. But I would say the PSP itself is still more on the intermediate level when it comes to repairs. If you do want to attempt one though, I would recommend grabbing a PSP 2000 or 3000. I just think for the most part, they're a bit more streamlined internally. So with those Phillips screws off, we can have our faceplate come off there. It's pretty easy to just change this out. By the way, if you have scratches like this does, or if the buttons are sticky, this entire piece comes off, at which point you can take the buttons, clean them, and then put them on a new faceplate. And these little faceplates are pretty cheap. They're like 10 bucks online. The only issue I run into is the third-party ones generally aren't as good of quality as what Sony had on their stock. So it is kind of hit or miss depending on how good the part will be when it shows up. Otherwise though, we do have to take the screen out, and then we'll see our motherboard. We also have pieces here that need to come up along with the shoulder buttons. The nice thing about the PSP, it was pretty modular overall. Everything for the most part plugged in, whether it was this sideboard here with our memory card slot and the D-pad, the joystick, also kind of off on its own that you can remove, put a new one on. And the right side here was just actually a ribbon cable that runs up and around when it comes to your triangle, circle, square, and cross buttons. Even our power in was a plug in here, so it's more of a pain to navigate around inside of the PSP. Not necessarily, oh, the power port's broken off, you gotta solder one on. But since I'm reshelling this entire system, everything has to come out. In fact, I would say reshelling a PSP when it comes to the back plate and all of this with the drive, yeah, that's not a very fun experience. Doing the front plate, perfectly fine. There's a couple of screws, but you get a bit more in depth there. You're gonna have some frustrations if you haven't done it before. Looks like we have a memory card in here, a 512 megabyte card, so plenty of space there. All right, making progress. Got a bunch of the screws out, some of the extra components that were holding onto the board, and we should be able to lift this guy right out there. The UMD drive is still attached to it. That's actually on the back end that we'll have to get to. Otherwise though, I just have some more things to pull out here along with our like headphone and TV out. The joystick, I have to get the power switch hold piece out, and I have to get our power in. We have, I think this our Wi-Fi antenna over here. There's just a lot of stuff that has to be pulled out of here and put into the new shell. So it looks like all of the pieces are out. We have to double check what comes with the kit exactly. Sometimes they'll give you like this little slider here. Other times you have to take it out. Otherwise though, I have to flip this around and we have to get to the UMD drive itself, which is an entire pain on its own. We have like this spring that is designed to add some force for it to close. So if you have it like halfway open, it'll pick one way depending on how far it's open. So either close or it'll open further. And all of that is predicated on this spring down here being in place and not being too like torn up or anything, just from general use. And it would vary depending on the version of the PSP. The 2000, probably the easiest to work with compared to something like the 1000, which was a nightmare, especially since the door being all plastic would be known to kind of break off at its hinges down here. And we also have like this metal cage that you have to line up. It's specific with kind of this slot here that will keep it on track. So all that has to be closed up all at the same time when you're putting it together. Anyway, I started by kind of unwedging it just with like a flat head here so it can get off of that. It'll then release the pressure on the opposite side and the door basically just falls off, which gives us access to our UMD drive. Now at this point you can just unscrew the 4 here, remove this, put a new one in. I think just need the screws for the new drive that I have, and I also need this metal cage. Now let's take a look at what comes with this new shell. Typically you get these on Amazon, they're like 20 bucks maybe with Prime shipping, and they'd flood eBay pretty consistently with different colors. Unfortunately, it was also with varying levels of parts that were included. Like, for example, the stickers on the back that try to make it look as official as possible. Sometimes they wouldn't have even the buttons that come with it. This one actually looks pretty intact overall. It even has a new spring right here for that door on the back that we were looking at. So I might be in good shape with this. To me, it really comes down to the fit. So when you're putting it all together and you screw it together, will there be a lot of air gaps or anything? Will it feel like it's kind of creaking in your hand when you move it? I was hoping it would be similar to like the God of War PSP, but no, not quite. This definitely looks a bit more, I guess, plasticky. It's very glossy, so it'll show scratches pretty easily. This, I guess, would be more of like a blood red color. Well, I guess we'll start by installing the UMD drive and we'll kind of work backwards. I did get a new drive. This was on Amazon as well. I figure if I'm doing this reshell, you see all the stuff I'm doing here, I might as well make sure the disk drive is good to go. So you can get an idea as to how this works very, very quickly. We have our ribbon cable coming off of here. That simply controls the laser itself in the eye. It works together with this motor right down here. Its job, if I flip it over, you can see the cable runs down and around, provides power to the center part. And what that'll do is it'll spin the UMD. Remember, the UMD is basically just a small like CD or DVD that's encased in plastic to help protect it, but it can still spin freely when it's locked in place here with these 2 pegs at the top. And on the bottom here, also part of that cable, you can see it kind of spins, is for our little arm, and this will move the laser back and forth. So this piece is essentially responsible for all the moving parts. This simply controls the laser as it focuses and it moves back and forth to read. Okay, so ribbon cables go through. They have holes for each one. That'll go there. That'll sort of go through here. And then they sit down. You see these rubber grommets. Those are designed to try to keep any vibrations out of the system. There we go, we got our metal bracket installed there. And then we just gotta make sure we can drop the back door on and then get these arms kind of lined up in this railing here as it's closing up. And trust me, this part is not fun. The best way I've learned to do it is sort of bending these out so that they'll basically just through pressure kind of stay along the tracks. And then just kind of slide this down and line it up there to close it up. by helping it along here, because there are 2 pegs that sit right on the corners with the idea of lining up with a hole there. You don't want to just press in because it'll break one of those pegs. You essentially have to use something to help kind of wedge it in. And there we go. It is installed. I need to put the spring on the other side now. That'd be down here. So the spring's installed now. I also have a little spacer here that kind of just keeps the spring in place. The door opens, shuts, has some good tension to it. So I think at this point, all I got to start doing is moving all these parts like the motherboard, the headphone jack, everything else just into this shell, and we can check it out. Well, I think I have it together enough to at least test it very quickly to make sure it turns on, and I guess we'll pop a game in to make sure it reads that. But let's go ahead and drop this on here. I do have the battery that I dropped in there, so pop the switch up. Got the green light. There it is. Got the sound. Yep. Good. And sure, it's 2011. That's fine. There we go. Okay. Yeah, it looks like it is on. No issues there. Let's pop a game in very quickly. I got Midnight Club and I have Ghost Recon Predator that I grabbed, so we can drop those in. Oh, look at that UMD. I just picked these up recently secondhand. That's the biggest drawback for these UMDs is these cases start to break. You can actually replace them because 9 times out of 10, the disc part that's in there is not scratched at all. And you can buy these like on Amazon, for example. You know, the UMD going crazy in there. But there's Midnight Club. Seems to read perfectly fine there. I have to kind of hold it together a bit. When it's all screwed together, everything kind of just holds better, especially with the UMD door on the back. Oh yeah, Rockstar Games. Remember when they used to make more than Grand Theft Auto? Those were the days right there. But it seems like Midnight Club is starting up. Anyway, now I'm gonna finish putting it all together and we'll play a few games and take a look around. All right, everything is together. Just put the battery door on. Have this to peel off the front. So they included like one of those protectors on like the front and the back. And that actually looks pretty good. The buttons here are a little strange because they're like lighter than the front. So it doesn't necessarily match up. A little volume key got away from me there. There we go. It doesn't necessarily line up with the same color scheme on the front. And it looks almost like they kind of forgot to paint it a bit. I don't know if this is the color scheme they were going for, but I think I'd prefer the buttons just to be like the same exact hue of red that we have for the rest of the shell. Otherwise, shoulder buttons are clicky. There's no obvious spacing between like the back and the front shells that I'm seeing. There's generally a little bit at the top here because these screws that Sony used aren't great. But for the most part, looking all around it, this is not as bad as what I would deal with back in the day with different shells where it kind of felt like they just never lined up correctly at all. This one isn't bad. All the buttons press really well. The joystick moves freely. And these buttons press well too. I had a little bit of an issue with that volume one, but after pressing it, it seems to have kind of clicked into place. And of course, there's like 1 or 2 pieces of dust that are still underneath of the faceplate. And that's just something that's unfortunate working on PSPs. No matter how hard I try, there'd always be like 1 speck of dust that would just get behind when I'm actually screwing it together. That was always frustrating, but you don't necessarily see it when it's on. Let's take a look at the cross media bar. Notice it's not the X media bar. Yeah, that's right. It's this is probably the thing that, I mean, you notice right away because you turn it on, and compared to the DS at that point, I mean, I know the cross media bar is still in like its early iteration, so there weren't all these features there at the time, but they added it as they went along. We eventually got the entire PlayStation store. If I remember right, that wasn't there at launch. But I mean, it had a full web browser, which is cool, an RSS channel. It had internet radio. Remote play was a big deal. They even got like Skype on here. I never used Skype on the PSP, but looking back on it, that's actually kind of impressive. Obviously, you could watch different media files, and you can even buy UMDs that were just outright movies, which again was kind of cool. They had like a camera that you could buy for it and use. You could read digital comics on here. Of course, you can use it as an MP3 player. There was a lot going on with this device, and Sony really positioned it as like a multimedia device that could also play games, which if you think about it, at the time, cell phones were really blowing up. We were getting like what, Blackberries and stuff that were more personal assistants than just texting and calling people. So I think Sony did a pretty good job at this point, considering they didn't have to change the internals or anything with the PSP much, whereas Nintendo had to go to the DSi to make it more like a personal assistant. But let's talk about the part that was really impressive at the time, which were the games. Now, when the PSP first came out, I remember Loco Roco was there, and that wasn't necessarily impressive visually. I think it was a cool game at the time, but when we started getting like full-on versions of games that felt like they were straight from the console, like I specifically remember Battlefront. When that came over to the PSP and it played just like the console version, I was pretty blown away by that. And then the other one that really sticks out to me are the Grand Theft Auto games that went to the PSP, because they were basically PS2 Grand Theft Autos shrunken down into handheld form. Or Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. It was a full Metal Gear Solid game for the PSP. In fact, at one point, it was apparently just going to be Metal Gear Solid 5 before they realized, oh wait, that's technically a handheld. We should hold off for the big console version of Metal Gear Solid down the road. Now, the obvious drawbacks using the PSP and those UMDs was that it did have longer load times than something like the DS, which was basically instant because we were using a cartridge there. But then you would get into the game and you would realize, wow, this is like leagues ahead of what the DS was doing at that time when it came to more or less reflecting what we were playing on consoles then. I mean, some of these games were basically like from the PS2 generation, just in your hand, which was really, really cool. The one other drawback though is we only had a single joystick. So you had some very wacky and weird control designs for like first person shooters where you may end up using like the face buttons to look or strafe or anything there, because they realized you had to also have your left thumb on the joystick, which would pull it off the D-pad. So for example, in this case, to look left and right, use the joystick. If you want to strafe, you have to hold down L so you can then strafe in place left and right. R is how you would fire. It is a bit awkward, I will admit, trying to make something like this that would be much better with 2 analog sticks work with 1. But I think for the most part, they did an all right job in like these early iterations. Also, I got one of those HDMI cables that plugs into the PSP, so I'll try to give you some footage here of one of these games so we can see what that looks like. But for the most part, I'm pretty happy with the PSP that I got here. Reshelling one is not fun, so I don't necessarily recommend it. But it is a fun system to get and check out even now, because I think some of these games have aged well enough. Like, there are some that are rough when it comes to the control scheme for the PSP, but there are some that are genuinely fun and worth checking out. Having it on the smaller screen will hide a lot of the graphical deficiencies, but considering this is a system that came out ahead of the PlayStation 3, I mean, it's still pretty impressive to this day, and that game library is pretty good when it comes to variety and number of titles. And yes, it's a good system to soft mod and do all kinds of stuff with. The homebrew scene around this system was out of control back in the day, and it still is now. But let me know what you guys think about the PlayStation Portable down below, especially if you had one when it first came out, or even if you're still playing it to this day. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.